Welcome to A Court of Transformation and Awakening. I'm Lorrie Gray.
And I'm Amanda Grace Harrison.
And in this episode, we are talking about book one.
As a whole.
Because we just finished our chapter by chapter read through. And so we thought we'd turn on the mic, no real plan, and just talk about all of it and what our thoughts were. I still think it's super cool. We've been spending time celebrating that we actually got a whole book one, which I guess we're calling season one.
Yeah,
podcast out.
Season one.
It's super fun. We finished a thing. We started a thing and finished a thing.
Oh my gosh, we did it.
It was a thing in our minds, and then it exists in the world. There's a saying out there that's like launch at 80%. Like basically don't wait until you're entirely ready to do something. Like launch when you're like 80% ready. But I don't think we launched at 80. I think we launched at...
We were way shy of 80.
23 and a half.
23.3. 56, I think. It's exactly
23.356%.
We were
ready. Here we go.
Way shy of 80.
Gosh, it's been so fun. I think that was the thing, and we I don't know if we mentioned this in the podcast anywhere or not, but at the beginning of this year, it may have been in January, I should go back. I had decided, I'm like, okay, I think it was maybe the end of last year, like November, December. I was like, okay, I definitely want to do a podcast. And I think in January, I even announced to my audience, like, okay, podcast coming soon, tune in here. And I set it up and then never did it because every time I would get ready, I just didn't feel, well, that's the thing, in my head, it made sense to do a podcast, but I just didn't feel super passionate about it. And then I would sit down and I would outline stuff. I'm like, okay, that's kind of interesting. And that's it was good. It would have been good, but it wasn't enough to get me out of bed and making it happen. And my husband also always lets me know that I need a co-host because he's like, well, I just need a co-host.
I'll leave it at that.
But there was no part of me that thought this would be what it was.
This is so random. This just came out of nowhere.
But gosh,
I'd never even heard of these books.
As of January.
Until January 10th or something.
And you set
them.
Goals in January as well that had to do with getting a podcast.
I wanted to have 12 episodes of a podcast finished and published by the end of this year. Woohoo!
And
passed that by a long shot. We've almost tripled that. So...
And I think there are some parallels to that with the book and what we've read and with dreaming. And I don't know, I think sometimes you just have to take steps. And sometimes, so one of the things we see Feyre talk about in these books is figuring out what she wants and not knowing exactly what she wants. And she has this this very small dream that she wants to move towards, but it's not the big thing. And we talked about how sometimes we give ourselves a hard time for not knowing exactly what we want when we haven't really practiced it. But also I think there's something to be said of just whatever you do know, just owning that. It's okay, I know I want to do a podcast, and no, I don't know on what yet, but it's enough to know that I want to do a podcast. Because once we declare I want to do a podcast this year, then you start looking for what it might be about. And then when an opportunity presents itself, it's that's the thing. And I didn't know that piece, and we didn't know that piece because we hadn't had that conversation yet. We couldn't have been expected to know that piece, but the fact that we knew we wanted to do a podcast was enough. And
this didn't even start out as a podcast.
No,
we weren't even talking about a podcast until we were partway into our whole conversation about a group coaching program based on the books. And then we're like, well, what if I don't even remember how podcast worked its way in, but it was now that we've actually finished, I'm like, that makes so much sense. I don't know why we just didn't think of that in the first place.
See, and I think that was part of my original thought of what it would be, but it wasn't necessarily part of the original plan. And it took a minute. I think it took, talking things out. But the fact that we both at the beginning of the year had this intention to do a podcast, I think was a huge part of it. Anyway, so it's super cool. And we've just talked so many times, guys, about how fun it's been to be able to just sit down and read a chapter and then just record thoughts on it. And the fact that there are those of you who are actually listening to it and then telling us you're enjoying listening to it. It's been so much fun because I feel like we kind of would do this no matter what, but then getting feedback that people actually enjoy is just talking about whatever has been the coolest thing ever. But I mean, I think the, so many, I mean, I've just come away with so many like personal lessons as an entrepreneur through this, because I think sometimes as a person who part of the cycles that I've been working on breaking, are the people pleasing kinds of cycles. And I can so get in my head of like, okay, what do people want? What do other people want? And there's a wisdom of like market research and things like that. And like part of the reason we felt pretty confident with this is like it's such, people are obsessed with this book. Like there's such a cult following. So it's not like there was no research, but I think when you do something just based on like what will other people like, it's not as powerful as us being like, we would do this for free, which is good because initially when you do any project, it's going to be for free. So far, this project has only cost us money,
Right.
but but the idea of like, we wanted to do it because we wanted to do it. We were like, we want to talk about these books anyways. We want to geek out about these books anyways. Like, what if we, recorded it, and to have a project that's built around something that we just love, and to notice how different it's felt doing this compared to some of the other projects I've engaged in the past that were more about trying to create something for other people. It's just been a vastly, wildly different experience.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so that's not about the book at all. That was just
Not
about
about the book at
that was
all.
about our experience with the podcast.
But it did remind me, part of that conversation reminded me of just in the, I don't know where it was, somewhere early in what you were saying about like not knowing what you want or not knowing what you want to do, and that whole situation where so many people, especially women, when you ask them what they want, they're like, I don't know. And then you see that in Farrah, she's like, I don't know. But really, we know that she wants to paint, but she just doesn't want to say that out loud because she's embarrassed of it, and she just, or she thinks she's no good. And there's a lot of jokes in the fandom about how bad Farrah is at painting. I don't think she's that bad at painting because when Tamlin looks at her art, he is able to recognize what it's a painting of, so it can't be that bad. But there's just that. I think whenever we say I don't know, and I have no idea, for me, I know there's always like there's a kernel, because there's always still that like, well, I would still really love to do acting, and I don't want to say that out loud most of the time because it's so embarrassing, and it is so like, okay, oh my gosh, I'm actually could cry about this right now. But like I moved out here 22 years ago to do that, so to say that out loud is like, wow, yeah, I do still want to do that, and yes, life turned out differently. And I'm so glad it did, because if I had become successful as an actress back when I was in my early 20s, I would probably be dead right now. I would have OD'd. I would have done something where or I'd be in jail. Who knows where I would be? But I wouldn't be here right now, and I wouldn't have my 4 amazing kids. But I do still have that, and so I can relate to Farrah when she just doesn't say it out loud, even though she knows. She always knows that she wants to paint. And when Tamlin asks her, she's like, "We have no idea." She just goes blank. But we know she's not really blank. And when I talk to other people, I always want to just pry open their head and go, do you really not know? Or is there that thing that you're just not willing to say out loud because it sounds so embarrassing, or you feel like you're too old, or you're just so like by this time in life you would need to have been working on it since you were 4, and that kind of thing to really do it justice. But yeah, there's that.
That's so powerful. I'm so glad you shared that.
Thanks.
Yeah. Which I mean, I have to say, like, talking about like being embarrassed about stuff, like at this point, so yeah, like I'm a life coach, and like I'm not necessarily okay. I think I am a little embarrassed about that at times, even though I'm already doing it. It's not even a dream, it's like a thing that I'm doing. But it's become a thing that people mock at this point, because I don't know. And if you guys aren't in that world, it's different. But because
Give me an example. People
well, it's
mock
like
life coaching.
because I mean, it's not a regulated industry. Like any person can just be like, I'm a life coach, and some people don't really have any business being a life coach. And like the joke is like in LA, like throw a rock and you'll hit an actor, or like a wannabe actor or a life coach, which I think is hilarious.
Kill 2 birds with 1 stone, right?
just throw a boulder this direction and you'll get us both. It's like if you're in LA, and then a lot of people are like, well, I tried to be an actor and failed, so I became a life coach instead.
So good.
But a lot of people are like, oh, like that it's like a fake career. It's like, oh, that's cute.
Oh,
Like
wow.
there's a little bit of like
That's ugly.
like, oh, that's cute.
Yeah, well, and same
Okay.
thing with acting too. I mean, there's so 5 billion
Yeah.
trillion just in the population of LA alone. So it is a little, or like, I have a screenplay. Yeah, get in the back of the line, homie. But yeah, I haven't heard that about life coaches, but that sucks.
A little bit, a little bit. It's probably, pretty good for me to be, for my own healing, to be in an industry that is like that, where, or even like there's been a number of times where I felt myself pushed, or like wanting to go get some like letters behind my name. It's like, okay, well, I'll go get like my master's in psychology. So then, and like I found actually the college that I went to before has like a master's in psychology with like a life coaching thing. And I'm like, oh, I should do that. And the thing is, I actually may do that because I'm interested in it. But the only reason would be able, or at the time, the reason I wanted to do it was to try to like prove that what I'm doing is actually real.
Yeah.
It's not this just like pretend career. And it is, it's interesting, like, and how much of that is, again, back to Feyre, it's like how much of that is just me, how much of that's internalized, how much of that's come from other people. But I think you make a great point here of a lot of people say they don't know what they want, but it's like, is that really true? Is that really true? Because now what I see from the books, and as we look at like where we're going to go in the books, is I do think one of the things we talked about early in the episodes is that you look at the beginning of the chapter or the book, you look at the first several chapters, we see her trauma, we see her life. And I do think this is dreaming small because that's as far as she can see based on what she's been through.
Yeah.
But that's how it always works. Like whatever dream we have is always smaller than what the eventual thing is because we can't see it till we can see it. Just like with this podcast, we knew like podcast, but we didn't know this until we got there. But yeah, so I think that all of us are always dreaming smaller than probably what the eventual goal is, that's happening simultaneously, but the unwillingness to say the part that we do know and the part that we do want and why that is. There are really fascinating questions. Yeah, because she did know. Well, and some of it I do think is putting things in a box. I mean, I remember thinking about like, what is it that I actually like love and enjoy? I'm like, I just like sitting around and have like really deep conversations with people. And there's a part of this that sounds so egotistical, but whenever I would go have like coffee dates with people and people like, hey, can I take you out for coffee and like pick your brain? Like I just wanted to like ask you questions, and people who wanted to sit me down and ask me questions about parenting or ask me questions about diet or ask me questions about whatever. I'm like, I love it when people take me out for coffee and then ask me questions and want to hear what I have to say about it. And the idea that I basically took that, which was my favorite moments, and turned that into a career, are hilarious.
It's genius.
It's hilarious. But initially, I do remember writing that off when somebody was like looking at, it was like zone of genius kind of work or strengths finder things. It's like, what are you good at? What do you enjoy? Like, where does time pass? I'm like, because I think I initially was like, well, you can't, well, yeah, I like going on coffee dates with people. Who doesn't like going on coffee dates with people? You can't make a career out of that. Or can you? Yeah, but I'm like, how many people have a dream or a vision or a thing that they're discounting because they can't see what's possible as well? Because I think there's something like, oh yeah, but that's just a hobby.
Yeah.
Like that can't be a thing that I made money off of. That couldn't be a career. That couldn't be the thing. But like you said, whatever it is, like maybe it's embarrassment, maybe it's self-imposed limitations, maybe it's, whatever it is.
And maybe it doesn't ever make money. And maybe that's not
The point.
of it at all. Maybe it's, I haven't finished this series. I don't know if painting ever has a purpose in Feyre's life other than just her having fun.
I know the answer.
I figured you would, but unfortunately I can't spoil that for you because I don't know.
And that's a hard part about this too, because there's so many things like this where like here at the end of book one, I want to talk about the other things. But as we do this podcast, if you guys hadn't noticed, we're trying to, for the most part, not skip ahead. So our goal is to track with all the books and just only talk about like what we know up to that point in the podcast. But I think we're both looking forward to once we've completed all of them, because once you're at the end of book two, you can go back and you can talk about everything that happened in one and two. And we're excited to get to future episodes where we're further along and can then talk about It's like, man, it'll be fun to look back at this moment and how we understood Feyre's painting versus how we understand Feyre and her relationship with her painting in book 2, 3,
Yeah.
3.1, 4. And then there's future books. I don't even know what's going to, like, I don't even know what's going to happen with those. Okay. So on that note, that was kind of one of the things I wanted to talk about today was like biggest personal themes for us. And this is one of those episodes where I do hope our listeners will go over and join the circle community and will share their insights because there's so much in a book. But I was thinking about today, I'm like, what's the thing that I most took away from the read through this time? And it's been different every single time. Like every time I've read it, there's been a different thing that has stood out to me, a different thing that's been impactful. But I'm like, if I had to look at the whole book and like one parallel that's like most parallel with my life, what would it be? So I'm curious to hear yours.
Well, you gotta go first because I have no idea. Mine's gonna have to come to me.
Well, but I feel like, but I was like, I feel like you just kind of like shared one. I'm like, was that yours? Because I mentioned before that I might ask that question. I'm like, was that your answer to the question?
Maybe.
Was it like not being embarrassed? Because okay, friend, but if you came out of this with like a don't be embarrassed of your dream, and like this book helps you realize that like you still want to do acting.
Well, I still know that. Like I know that.
But like,
and I know that I'm like, just as soon as the kids are, as soon as my youngest is a little less dependent, then I'm like, that's where I'm headed with everything. When I have some money to spend and some, I mean, even if right now, even at the level of dependency she has, I could pay a nanny to, if there was a great enough nanny who was just so fun and like a little Mary Poppins, then I could totally go do
so it wasn't
intensive training and launch myself back into that whole world.
So it wasn't so I guess what you were saying wasn't so much like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that, but more like there's a part of me that's embarrassed that I want that.
There is, yeah. But it was more so seeing. It wasn't so much about me. It was just about other people. I'm like, okay, I know that that's my experience, that I don't always admit that out loud and that I might say I don't know what I want. And then I know other people who they have a similar thing. And I know that they said, but I don't bring it up. When they say I don't know what I want, I don't bring it up.
Gotcha.
Because I'm like, well, I'm not going to plant that in their head if they're not ready to say it out loud yet. But I'm pretty sure I know what they want to do. So then when seeing it in Feyre, I'm like, okay, this is obviously like a pretty universal theme.
Yeah.
That it's not just me, it's not just these other people in my personal life. If it's also the main character in one of the most popular series right now, then this is obviously a big thing. And like, why are we all so afraid to say that? I mean, yeah, and it is like, I could see how her painting being just something like, oh, that's kind of embarrassing and she had never, she didn't know. It's not like she was talking to her best friends either, She had no friends. She had nobody that she could have talked to.
This wasn't like a safe, supportive community.
She had just met them, and they were very not safe, and she didn't feel that it would probably have been an awkward thing, but
yeah, which is interesting. I've had a few clients. Actually, when I added up several like clients over the years who are artists. I've loved coaching artists. They sometimes I'm like, I don't know if I'm the right person to coach artists because I see the world so like abstractly and theirs is so visual, but I've loved it. And sometimes though, they will talk about like, okay, I tried to do this course on marketing or I tried to learn about this thing and it's all about like, what's the problem that you solve? And I've seen a number of artists get in their head of like, I don't solve a problem. Like this thing that I do, it's not that important. And I'll listen to this dialogue of like, it's like I'm making a painting. It's just like colors on a page. And like, I watch them discount it. And they're like, I don't solve a problem. And one of the things, this was not my original thought. This was something that I heard from somebody else being coached in a group. I can't even tell you who it was from. I just need to say that like, this was not my original thought, but they're like, people have blank walls and they want a thing to put on it. Mm-hmm. That is the problem that you solve. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not like ending world hunger, but like, you better believe that right now there are people moving into places and they're like, I want a thing on that wall. Mm-hmm. And somebody needs to make the thing that goes on the wall. And like they overcomplicate it, like it doesn't matter. But I tell you what, like when you walk into a room and like you have like a painting on the wall that you love, it's so great. Like especially something that that moves you and like sets the tone of a room, and it can make an entire room have a certain feel, and how we feel influences how we behave, and how we behave like shapes our life. And like it's been really fun like talking with my artists and like watching them discount what they do
Yeah.
and then helping them shift it, especially when you understand that pretty much everything we do is based on how we feel. People can say otherwise, but we don't. We do what we do based on how we feel.
Well, and art for me has been, I remember this maybe 16 years ago, I went through this is actually funny. I had just let go of my agent here in LA because I had gotten to the point where when my special agent ring would come on, I had a sense of dread. I'm like, oh no, what is this audition going to be? Because she was constantly sending me on really fun things, but it was like, you got to be there at 6 a.m., which getting across LA, or like be there at 8 is the worst because then you're driving right when everybody's trying to get to their office. And you need to be dressed like you're going to a nightclub because it's a beer commercial. And it was just, oh my gosh, just was not fun. It was not exactly being the quirky best friend in a romantic comedy, which was what I wanted to be doing. But instead it was beer commercials. So anyways, I had just let her go, and we went and did this live-in construction job up in Lake Arrowhead, up at a cabin. And I was really depressed about like, now what am I going to do with the rest of my life if I'm not acting? And of course I was just like minutes away from being pregnant with my first, and that's where life was going. But at the time I didn't know that. I thought I couldn't get pregnant because we've been trying to get pregnant forever. So I thought we were going to have to start the adoption process, blah, blah, blah. But what helped me when I was in the middle of that deep, dark, like, just everything was just blank. And my cousin, Natalie Solomon, and do a little plug for her, Natalie Solomon and Rude, I think right around the same time, she was launching her career as an artist. And so she had sent me a link to her website, and just going on her website and just browsing through her work thus far. And she only had, I don't know, definitely less than 100 paintings at the time because it was really new in her career. And I just remember coming completely out of my depression and being like, what else new is out there that I've never seen? This stuff is so beautiful. Just the beauty and the creativity of it just lit something in me where a minute ago it had been all about me and I don't know what I'm going to do. And then just knowing that other people know what they're doing and they have their thing figured out, and I can enjoy just consuming their stuff, and I didn't have to be producing something to give, and I didn't have to be doing my own creative thing because there's so much beauty out there already. It was so art is just incredible, and it so doesn't have to be. I mean, it really does solve problems. Like, that is a problem. Being depressed could be seen as a problem, even though we all know it's about getting some deep rest. Art can save lives, probably. It didn't. I mean, I wasn't suicidal, and it pulled me off the ledge, but it felt like it.
Yeah.
It felt that real.
Yeah. Yeah. So the idea that, so coming back to, so this was a theme that we saw throughout the book, like Feyre's relationship with her dream, which again, I'm like, it was small because that's as far as she could see. But even then, the fact that she was embarrassed of it, she wasn't willing to look, to really say it out loud or to pursue it for a while. And we see all the reasons for that. But I think, yeah, when I look at this book and I think about book one as a whole, our relationship with our dreams was one of those ongoing themes. But her relationship with her dream was so tied into this other theme of her relationship with herself and her self-talk and how she understood the world and her place in the world, all of which is influenced by her trauma. And that, again, that's why I love these books, because I'm like, gosh, that's always how it works. It's like, you can't just talk about your relationship with your dream, because your dream is a thing that comes out of you. And so your thoughts about you in the world and who you are influence that, and how you think about you ties in so much to trauma and how we see ourselves. And she just managed to communicate so many of these deep truths that we all experience as humans, in this story form in a way that was just so deep and such close parallels. By the way, this is tangent, and then we'll come back to important things.
I love tangents.
I was re-listening to some of the podcast episodes, and I'm so used to, within my coaching, talking about what it means to be human and like humanity, and Faye is human.
Not
There was
realizing it had to
there
do
was
with
there was a few times where I was talking about Fays and I said something about they're like human.
he's just human. But
Like,
you mean just like they're
I meant like
I
a
know.
being.
I knew
I
what
meant-
you meant. And I knew at the time that we were saying it, I'm like, well, he's actually not a human.
Oh
But
my
he's
gosh. I wish you would have caught it
human in
because
the
I went
sense
back.
of,
I'm like,
it's human in the sense of
so
yeah.
I just apologize to the listeners for the times you're like, but he's not a human. I know. I meant being.
Yes. He's
meant
a
being.
fallible being.
Being.
He's not a
not
divine, perfect entity.
Okay. So another big thing. Okay, so when we talk about reading this book, so whenever I read it, I read through all of book one and I got to the end and then I immediately went back and reread it. And so part of it was understanding that this blight wasn't really a blight, that it was really a person. Yeah. And I wanted to go back and re-understand all of that. But the other thing was, getting, and this was only like halfway through whenever we realized that she was glamored through the first part and she didn't see everything. And I wanted to go back through. Right. And so the idea that she was experiencing things like double level, like on the one hand, she couldn't see the fairies there and there really were fairies there. And then she learns, okay, and so she's going back through and like rethinking about all of this. And then we get to the point where we realize this wasn't really a blight. This was actually like a person. It was like an actual curse. And then going back. And it was so interesting reading those first chapters, realizing there's like multiple layers to what she doesn't know based on what she's experiencing. And she has these moments where the glamour's lifted, the information is there that she didn't have before, and how that changes how she experienced it. I feel like as I parallel the book with my life, like I feel like that is the season that I've been in, and like that was the part, big picture for this book for me, that was huge. And I think we talked about it a little bit in the podcast. I've had those moments before where like you get information and it's like, oh, everything looks differently. Like you start to understand a person and then their behavior changes. Something becomes true about religion and it looks different. Something, I've had like moments like that, but it was maybe, like I said, I need to do time frame. Probably about a year ago that for the first time in my life that I realized how much I dealt with like people pleasing tendencies. And I don't know if I talked about this on the podcast or not, but like if you had talked to me a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I'm already like, I'm a coach. I'm in the personal development world. I'm doing self-awareness. I'm doing all kinds of things. And if you had asked me like, do you deal with people pleasing? I would have said no. Like, not really. Like, it's like,
I don't care what anyone thinks.
Well, no, it's not like they didn't care, but it's just like, it's like, oh, kind of to the level that, like, yeah, sure, some, but like, really, that's not like my big thing. It's really these other things. And, it's like, oh, yeah, I way more deal with, being controlling or being a perfectionist or being whatever. And like, in my mind, it was these other things. And it was maybe a year ago. It could have been a little longer that I was like, oh, wait a minute. Wait, what? And like, and I started looking at it and I just had this moment of this like growing awareness over the course of a couple months until I had like a full stop moment of like, this might be the biggest thing that I deal with and have dealt with. But it was it's like the thoughts that you have that you can't distinguish from facts are the hardest to like pick out for yourself. Like it was so deeply entrenched, I couldn't even recognize it as a pattern. And I mean, I had to a certain extent, but over the past year, there's been, it's been interesting going back and looking at things and sort of having my world and my understanding of myself shuffle a little bit. I'm like, oh, if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have explained this in this way. Or here was this thing that I did in my business and I thought it was so evolved. And I'm like, dang it, that was still people pleasing. And I couldn't see it. So like watching her like have these moments and like have the glamour be revealed and like understanding that this one thing was something else and sort of coming to terms with things not being what you thought that they were. I just resonated with that a lot through this read through. I'm like, yes.
It's such a good point though about like the things that we don't, they're so real to us. Like they're probably just an opinion. They're a belief that we have, but it's so real and so deep that we don't know that it's an issue because it just comes across to us as fact. It's just reality. Things are just like this. And really, that's just the way that we're spinning things, and we don't know at the time.
Yes.
And there's no way to know. How do you point out the water to a fish? Like you just can't. They're just in it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's totally a thing. And like being able to, to have those moments. And I think the biggest thing is, for me, doing sort of it was, how do I say this? Like when it's ourselves, I think it's so easy to then do this inner dialogue that doesn't make sense of, oh my gosh, well, I should have been able to see that thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like I should have seen
Yeah.
the thing that I shouldn't see or that I didn't see. Because once you get there and like it's sort of obvious, it's like the answer to a riddle, which also tied into book one. Like once you get to the place where like you know what the answer to the riddle is, like then it seems
You can't not see it.
You can't not see it. Yeah, or like those pictures where it's like if you look at it one way it looks like one thing and you look at the other and then at first you're like I only see the one thing and then somebody shows you the other. It's like, oh, okay, now I see it. Now I can't unsee it. But whenever we shame ourselves for the fact that we couldn't see it before, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think that was when we talk about like timing of things, it's one of those things that I think if I had awareness of sooner, I didn't have I don't think I had the foundation in place to really be able to have that revealed to me and have that information and be able to assimilate it and deal with it and work through it in a way that was healthy. So I feel like I had like a Feyre like embarrassment moment of like, so when I was running through the garden, I had an audience. It's like, yeah. And I'm like, I wonder how many people in my life saw this that like I didn't see. And like I had an embarrassment moment for just wondering like how many moments I'm like thinking things are one way or saying things one way, and I'm like, who knew? Like who's the Tamlin, who's the Lucian, who's the other people who are like, gosh, you don't know yourself very well.
Yeah, I had just a couple months ago. I had this I don't know. I wish I could look the girl up now and ask her what she meant by it at the time. But I remember in college, there was this girl who in my it was in my nonverbal communication class, and we had to there's some exercise the teacher had us do where you had to go around the room and say a compliment about each person. And I remember this girl, she was a very stoic person, very sarcastic. Lord, just saying that out loud now, it's so obvious. But to me at the time, her compliment to me was, Amanda, you're just so authentic. And I was like, wow, coming from her, that is really, man, what a compliment that is, because she's like not a complimentary person. And then, so what was that? That was in the 90s, late 90s. And then it was just this year where I went, oh my gosh, I bet she was being sarcastic, because I was probably like the least authentic person in the world. And I was so polar opposite from her, because I was just like, just like party animal and talking. And I probably just was so fluffy. I would love to go back and meet her and find out if she was really like, no, I thought that was really authentic of you, that you weren't embarrassed to show up as who you are. Because to her, to act like I was acting would have been very embarrassing. So now I'm like, oh, I wish I could know. All these years I've lived with that was such a great compliment. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, what if everybody in the class knew that she was like, good one. Yeah, she's real authentic,
Oh my gosh.
So it's the same moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, were all those fairies in the garden, like as she's going out and she's like being all sneaky and marking the exits and thinks nobody's watching, and they're just 10 gardeners around her going, oh my gosh, check her out. Oh, it's so painful. It hurts.
Friend, what? I don't know that there's necessarily like a lot of benefit for like re-exploring that, but I get the point. Like,
no, I'll never know. But I have a lot of those embarrassing moments when I look back at like who I was as a teenager, and I'm like, everybody around me had to just know that I was just the worst person, and I was, and at the time I just thought I was great, and then I look back at some of the stuff I did and said and just who I was, and I'm like, it's mortifying. It's so mortifying. So I feel her pain, because I had an audience, but I didn't realize it because I thought I was awesome. Because there was a lot of awesome things about me. There were also a lot of embarrassing things that I never want to relive and wish I could go back and undo. But that's life.
Oh my goodness. Yep, I have some of those moments. And yeah, looking back, yeah, younger years in high school and college and stuff. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. How much lack of self-awareness I had. Yeah. And so this, and so this sort of like revealing in the last season, like I've been in a place for it to feel freeing as opposed to embarrassing. Yeah. I am more in a place of, yeah. I mean, there was kind of a moment of like, wow, how did I not see that for sure? But also, yeah, I'm like, okay, I think things are revealed to us sometimes in stages because we need it to be that way.
Yeah.
Or like and so much of it's like what we're able to hear, what we're able to understand, and like that we don't need to rush it as long as we keep being open. Yeah, but anyway, when I think about just the season I was in when I read this book, I'm like, gosh, it was so much like a remove the glamours kind of season for me of understanding myself. And even in that, knowing there's definitely still stuff I don't see. Like I feel like I know myself and understand myself more than I ever have. Like I feel like so many places where like the glamours have been ripped away to like really see what's true. And I'm like, and also I am sure there are still places where I am very, very blind.
Yeah.
Very, like, for sure. And it's always both. And as long as I don't make myself wrong or bad for the fact that it is going to be that process, it's okay. But anyway, so that was a huge personal parallel for me. Okay, so what else? So book 1 themes. Okay, the self-talk theme came up a ton.
Yeah.
Now, and this was an interesting one because that was a theme I connected with so strongly, but that one was not as much of a connector for you, right?
No, but it's funny because now I just call myself being like now I notice my negative self-talk more, whereas before I was like, I don't really have negative self-talk, and now I'm like, I'm totally pulling a Farrah right now.
A Farrah moment.
I'll notice the stuff that I'm saying in my head, and I'm like, that's what Farrah would say. That's probably not the truth. Then it's probably just me with my negative self-talk. Mr. McFeely with a special delivery.
Yeah, I'm guessing that's like the delivery person.
We'll pause.
Yeah, it's delivery. It's fine. Actually, you know what I think those are? We might leave this in the podcast. I think those are my leather pants.
You have to try them on. The celebration pants.
I don't know if you guys could hear, like those of you who are going to be listening to the podcast, there was like a knock on the door and we heard the gate. Somebody dropped off a package. But in celebration of finishing the season 1 podcast, so Amanda and I have joked, okay, see, this is book 2.
I know. But it's okay. That's not a spoiler.
That's not really a spoiler.
That people wear leather.
There are, okay, so let me say, so there is another race of beings who live within Printhia Prithian. I've said that wrong a couple times too. Prithian, who wear fighting leathers, and we think this race of beings are pretty cool. And so I had this moment of like, gosh, I really just kind of want some leather pants. And like we joked about like, what if we ever go to like Comic-Con or something like that? Like we need to like put together our outfit. Yeah. So I ordered
faux leather.
Faux leather.
Vegans out there, don't freak out.
From the Spanx company because they're supposed to.
I can't wait to see these.
So I do think it's kind of funny that those showed up during the podcast recording.
So perfect.
I know it's really perfect. So I'm like, these are my ACO.
Yay.
Well, it's not really ACO. I guess ACOMAF pants.
Yeah. ACOTAR is a series.
Maybe yes. The ACOTAR. It's my ACOTAR series pants. So perhaps I will wear them whenever we record. Every time we record.
And then you'll have to figure out some way to get your cute bum into the shot so we can see your.
We'll have to do a photo shoot.
Spanx bum.
Every time we do, like an episode 2, or season 2, book 2,
and here's
3.
the obligatory shot of Lorrie's bum.
I just always wear them
in her leathers. So good.
Oh my gosh. Okay, good. So we were talking about Farrah moments. Yeah. So we know
self-talk.
We now joke in our family because my husband read the first part of the books. He quit. We were just talking about that this morning. He read through part of book 1. He got to I don't remember, maybe like chapter 18. And he was talking to me last night.
Which is almost right when it starts to get good. He got so close.
He came to me last night. He's like, what's that quote that Tamlin says? Like, don't feel bad for one moment about doing what brings you joy. He's like, what would bring me joy is to stop reading this book series. And I was like,
We had to give it to him, man. He even used a quote from the books.
But he's read enough that like we can joke about having like a Feyre moment in our head. But yeah, so you have noticed more of that than you thought was there,
Yeah.
perhaps.
I'm like, I don't really do negative self-talk because I don't should on myself. Like, only because I've learned the things to like notice. I'm like, oh, okay, gotta switch that. Oh, should, could, next time I will. Okay, done. Whereas Feyre would just leave it as should have. Man, I suck. I mean, in different words, but yeah, I don't normally do that. But then, yeah, there have been some moments where and I think the way that I get sneaky with myself and I get away with self-talk is that I don't even allow it to go into words in my head. It stays more like right brain as like a feeling. I just feel stupid a lot. And I think that's where my big how I get away with it. I'm like, no, I have great self-talk. I'll tell myself great things, but I will feel really shitty about stuff that I've done, and I will just I'll know that it's true. Without saying the word that was stupid, I will feel the feeling of that was so stupid.
That's so fascinating, friend. Because I think for most people, like the story comes first, but not always. And the idea of like, I have an emotional, like I have a feeling without necessarily having words for it, or just like noticing that that's there.
Yeah.
Man, I mean, on the one hand, I'm kind of like, I wish you hadn't known that, but also I always think knowing's better than not knowing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm very, see, and for me, and I think that that's, you know, most people that I talk to, some people are more in touch with like the emotions and some people are more in touch with the thoughts. Like I'm much more in touch with my actual like thoughts and what they sound like. And putting words to emotions is, you know, increasing my emotional literacy and emotional awareness has been a process for me for sure. And again, I just did so much and I did so much work around it where like every single day I'm looking at my thinking. I think that that's the thing, like over the last 3 to 5 years, like I was already a person who was aware of my thoughts, and then I cultivated such a high degree of like thought awareness. And so sometimes when I talk about it, I think it can almost seem like, oh my gosh, like my self-talk's like terrible. And I don't think it's really like, honestly, I think that my self-talk is really good these days, but I'm also very aware of it, where I think a lot of people are not. It just sounds like we were talking about like not being able to see it because it's like, you know, you're a fish in water, like that's just what it looks like. I think so many people, they're actually very, very negative in their own minds, but if you ask them about it, they wouldn't think so because that's just what their head has always sounded like. And it's just quote unquote true. It's just how it is. They're just being practical. They're just being logical. I don't think that most people have an awareness of really how negative or not negative their thoughts are because they don't spend a lot of time thinking about their thoughts or being aware of their thoughts or being conscious of their thoughts or their emotional states.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this book is definitely, and like on the one hand, there's been some like positives. I'm like, oh my goodness, okay, I relate so much to what she's talking about, but it's also given me space to notice that that's not really like my head doesn't sound like that anymore. Like I don't like now, and I can still pick it up. And like, and if I have like a day where I'm like down on myself during the week, I'm going to be so incredibly aware of it because I've trained myself to be aware of it. But thinking back to what it sounded like in my head before and what it sounds like it now. There was, I think, along that theme of self-talk, like this book felt pretty celebratory for me. I'm like, okay, I relate. Like I could tell stories for days of the decades of horrific self-talk, but then to like wake up right now and actually peek into my mind and be like, oh my gosh, it's not that bad. I mean, I do still have moments, but even if I have a thought and even if it feels true, it feels less true than it ever has. And like it shifts really easy. It's not sticky. I don't like it stuck in it. Not usually. And so I do think that theme just stands out to me as well, because that's one that I've been working on for a very long time. And reading through the end of this book, I'm like, my self-talk, even this time reading the book compared to the last time that I read the book, compared to the last time that I read the book, I'm like, it's not who I am anymore. And that was really fun. I'm like, that is a cycle that I have pretty much broken. And it's never 100%, right? It's never 100%, but that's not my pattern anymore.
Sweet. Time to order some more pants.
Just
Celebrate.
no. Then you got to get once you get the
Yeah,
pants, then you got to get the like.
whole armor,
I don't
full
know.
body.
I don't have a vision for the top yet. Like, I think I could definitely like. I can. I'm not quite sure for shoes either. Like, I've got some ideas. Definitely something with a heel. Like, there's some pretty great boot options in my mind, or something really practical and like
You need both.
you need both.
You, for every occasion, since you're going to be wearing these 24/7 now.
Yeah.
Well, not when you're sleeping, but all the days. You'll have your soft slouchy sweater with the leathers, and then you'll have your
I'm so
lacy
excited.
tight black top.
Oh my gosh, I'm like, what does the top look like? Somebody needs to like put together a Pinterest board for me of like how you style. Like how do you create a yeah, that kind of outfit. I keep wanting to use the words stop. We stop talking about it. Okay, back to book one.
Back to book one.
Okay, so what else were big themes that came out in book one for us?
So I have not solved my theme yet, so I don't want to bring it up because it would be so much nicer to present it with a bow on top. But this whole thing I keep asking myself is what are my innocent fae that I have to murder? What are the darlings that I need to kill off? Because everything I come up with is like, but that's not really in it. Like I'll be like, okay, I need to kill off my time sucks. I need to kill off but I'm like, a time suck isn't an innocent. It's not so hard to kill off. Like it's like I already know that I need to kill that off. And there was nothing in Farrah's mind that was like, oh yeah, I needed to kill this guy anyways. He's a pain in the ass. You know, like these were genuinely really hard. Like she shouldn't kill them almost, you know, like not almost. You really shouldn't kill them. They're innocent beings. And so that's where I'm like, I don't know what that is. I don't have any tidy answers, and everything that I come up with, I'm like, no, I need to kill that anyways. And I haven't thought of anything that's like that. But and I guess it could be just, I don't know, like just extra time with the family, like getting quantity time with the kids instead of quality, you know. It could be something like that, but I don't know yet.
Yeah.
What needs murdering?
Metaphorical murdering.
Yes.
That's an interesting thing. So it's like, so in your, okay, sorry, I might put in my coach hat for just a little bit. So, okay, so when you talk about a time suck, like give me an example of a time suck for you.
But what is a time suck for me right now? What do I do that's a time suck? I don't really watch. I mean, reading now is
work.
Part of work.
That doesn't count. That doesn't count.
I think it's gross to say out loud, but it's like just piddling, you know, like not like I'll spend 45 minutes and then I'll be like, what did I just do with that 45 minutes? And I will have like, I don't even know what I've done with my time. I think it's just not having a firm grasp on my time, where I'm just like, what did I do? I washed a dish. I answered a text. I tried to figure out what to do next. I don't know. It's not even like I don't have those obvious things. Like I watch TV for 4 hours every night, and I don't have obvious time sucks. I mean, now even scrolling on Instagram, I only scroll on our ACOTAR stuff, so it's not even. Some of that probably could get into the time suck category, but I don't do the social media stuff personally. So I don't know.
It's super interesting.
I just feel like I lose a lot of time. Where I'm just like,
yeah,
what did I just do with my day?
Yeah.
Like I know I was busy all day long and never got to the stuff I wanted to get to, but what was I doing?
Yeah.
It's probably just a lot of stuff with my kids, you know, like where I'm just like, oh, I'll get you an apple and I'll go do that, or I'll spend a whole day doing laundry. Like necessary-ish stuff.
And that's been interesting for me too. So like sometimes I've had seasons where like my coaching roster is like incredibly full, right? And I'm like coaching, you know, I've had some times where it's just like really, really full days. And I get through the day and we get to the end of the day and everything's done and we go to bed and that's fine. And then I have other days where I have like no clients and I'm still doing stuff from sun up to sundown. And it's like still the whole day is full. And I've had that moment of like, that's so interesting. I'm like, what how much like life there is and things that are happening. I don't know, like I wonder if the thing that needs to be killed is your judgment of it.
Pause.
Long pause.
I feel tears coming. I think there's some truth in that. I don't even know what that even looks like, not judging it.
Because the actual thing, like, so what we're actually talking about happening is like, okay, I washed a dish, replied to a message, and like if you actually listed what you did, like there's nothing evil in that. Like we're talking about like innocent fate, like I think that is such a parallel because it's a all of that's really innocent and all of it's actually even good. Um, and I think if somebody was like, okay, I have 45 minutes, what do I need to do? I need to do the dishes, reply to a message, do this thing, like do 6 or 8 things. And then they did that in those 45 minutes, it would feel really productive. But just the fact that like you're doing it naturally. Like I just wonder if there's like a judgment that it's supposed to be this like intentional plan thing, and because it's not, it has less value.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I would never have come up with that one on my own, that's for sure. Ah,
Do you know I schedule piddle time?
you.
I do. By the way,
Time.
I'm so glad that somebody else calls it piddling. So I have clients that are from Europe. Piddling, like in Europe, like it means pee. Piddling means peeing.
So if they're listening to the podcast, they're like, you think you need to spend less time peeing, or you had an 8-hour day and you just peed all day long?
You just but like that was what it meant in my family too. Like piddling was like when you sort of wandered around aimlessly.
Yeah.
And you and I joked today, like Amanda and I, before we started this podcast, we're like, oh my goodness, are we too chill to record a podcast today? And I was like, what if we just like stared at the wall for a while? But I started scheduling time in my life for that. And I don't want to say like scheduling is almost too intentional. I think what I started doing was noticing when I was in that sort of space naturally and not trying to force myself to be in a different space. And I allow time that is unscheduled and that is piddle time that I embrace as a thing that I think is beautiful and needed. We were talking this morning too, pre-podcast, about like sort of masculine energy being brought to things. And I think that myth that everything is supposed to be intentional. I don't know if that's how it works. Like I love those times whenever it's like, gosh, I just like lost 45 minutes and like my brain wandered and like I thought about things and I was just doing whatever I was doing without it having to be structured and be an agenda. And I actually think I think that that's beautiful and necessary and a healthy part of being humans on Earth.
It also reminds me of the conversation on podcast from last week about the 50-50 balance, you know. I think that's why you're so comfortable with your piddle time because it's not more than 50% of your time at least. You have the structured ticking things off and accomplishing the important things and getting all that done. So then the piddling just becomes like, yeah, it's balancing things out.
It's really refreshing. You know, it's interesting too, though. Like, I also want to say, like, I have a number of clients who are actually a fair amount of clients. I have to look up, but like, one of the things. So I talk about partnership, right? Like, so partnering with our nervous system, partnering with our strengths, even partnering with like our self-protective things, but like really having a solid, shame-free awareness of who we are and bringing that all to the table as we do talk about how we move forward. And I have a lot of clients who are not neurotypical, like they are neurodivergent in some way, like they deal with ADD or they deal with ADHD. And I don't specifically coach on those things. I'm not an expert in those things, but I do have a very firm belief that that's not a problem. Like it's more so, can you understand how your brain works? Can you understand how your nervous system works? Can you actually be in the most like factual, fully acceptance, no labels right, wrong, otherwise just like this is what's true, and can then we partner with all of that as we create a path forward that makes sense. And you know, my people who do deal with ADD or ADHD, they're not going to be here's this like rigid schedule that we go forward on. And it also doesn't mean that they can't be successful. Now, sometimes it's like, oh my goodness, like my brain's just like wandering like all over the place and like I'm not on task. I think sometimes for people that can become a problem. I think sometimes there can be a need to train the brain to be more present at times. I also think there's a lot of unnecessary judgment towards that doesn't need to be there for a lot of people. And I'm like, I think some people are more like wanderers to a certain extent. What's that saying? Like, not all who wander are
Or
lost.
lost. Yeah. I have a pillow that says that.
Yeah, I don't know, but like,
That is me.
it would be super interesting though for like however it is that your brain works, all those things. If like the thing that you murdered was your judgment of it, like your automatic assumption that it was bad or wrong, and just see what was left at the end, and maybe there is like, oh, this like how do I say this? Like if you approached it with the idea that like I'm going to assume that none of this is a problem. Like the idea that any of it's a problem, like that's off the board. I wonder how many actual real problems exist outside of your judgment of how you think it's supposed to be.
That's a fun experiment.
It would be a really fun experiment. I've done this with myself too. And even again, because I actually have judgment of myself for this, because I read too many books like, oh, okay, it's supposed to be like this. There's still a lot of like, I have some structure, but I still do a lot of like, what do I actually feel like doing right now? If it's like I got 10 things to do, it doesn't matter which ones happen first, which one do I feel like doing, which one, what's kind of my energy like right now, what sounds interesting. And I think I'm a lot less structured than people think that I am because I've given myself permission to not be. Like,
Well, it's because you structure in the unstructured time. I've always admired that about you. Like when I've been able to call you up and it's not that much advance and you're able to like, yeah, I can come over for the whole afternoon or whatever. And I'm like, how can Lorrie of all people do that? She's so busy. There's so much going on. And you're like, it's because I schedule that. And then like I schedule free time because I know stuff is gonna come up. So I put it on the calendar. It's genius.
there, and like I said, and there's some of it, but I'm guessing I would guess this. I would guess that like when you think about like how my schedule looks and how structured things are, I'm guessing you're overestimating how much structure there is.
I've seen your calendar. Your calendar is beautiful and all structured and rainbow color organized.
It's mostly calls because this week there was a number of days when I'm like, I'll work on that project, and then I got there, I'm like, I'm so tired. I'm gonna lay on the couch and read a
I
novel.
love that. Flexible structure is just beautiful.
But I had judgment of all of that because I thought it was supposed to be this other way that like every moment's like the idea that when you read about something like mindfulness is good. My perfectionist brain is like, okay, so we need to be mindful all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, being intentional with your time is good. Okay, so I need to be intentional with all my time. And it created this very like all or nothing. And then all my brain saw were like the places where that wasn't happening and assumed it was a problem. Okay, here I'm not being efficient with my time. Here I'm not being intentional with my time. Here I'm not doing, advanced planning with my time, and somehow that's a problem. And like the day that I'm like, okay, if I remove my judgment of it, if I remove the idea that it's supposed to be different, and I actually sit back and look at what's actually happening in my life outside of my judgment that I'm doing it wrong, are there any actual problems? There were like a couple, but they were very, very, very minimal. Very, very, very minimal. Most of it was just my judgment. So if anybody else, like listeners, where it's like what's do I have a high fay to kill? That would be one I would suggest. The idea that it's somehow supposed to be different than it is. And just to even try on the other thinking. Like, and here's an exercise that I'll do sometimes if my brain is like, this thing is wrong. It's supposed to be this way. Sometimes what I do is I challenge my brain to go the complete opposite, like the thing that I don't believe at all. It's like, no. Actually, like being completely unscheduled and like piddling with no agenda is right. That's exactly how it's supposed to be.
That's
And then
the highest and best.
right. And then I try to see if I can come up with evidence. Like I'm like, if somebody said, I'll give you $1 million if you can make a case for this, if you can convince me that this is the highest and best way, I'll give you $1 million. I'm like, what's the case that I would make? And then it's so fascinating because what I end up with actually is a really like balanced perspective. It's like, okay, there are areas where it can be a problem and there's areas where it really serves me. And it just, it takes the emotion out of it. Or it's just like, oh, so like most things, it's like pros and cons.
Mm.
Oh, so like most things, there's areas where it's not great and areas where it's really great, and there's okay. And like, and once I do something that gets all the emotional charge out of it, then kind of figuring out what actually needs to happen next, it just gets a lot more clear because I'm not in my narrative.
Yeah.
I'm so pro piddle time though.
Yes.
It's so healthy.
Pro peeing for you Europeans.
European?
European. Ben would like that one.
Oh, that's
So
about
funny.
that's about as juvenile as it gets. Calling back to our juvenile romance stuff here, but Bren, thanks for sharing some of that stuff.
Yeah, thank you for having the brilliant coaching response too. Jeez. It's good stuff.
But that whole scene before we even read the books, it's like, man, there it's like, are there parallels that to that? What does that look like? Like how far do the parallels go? What do we even want to say about that? Because yeah, like on the surface, this is just a mixed bag of like her murdering an innocent. It's like there's no way that that's ever okay. And yet also it's like it's one of those, gosh, I feel like it's like one of those like ethics questions, you know, that you can argue all day long and
Yeah.
there's no clear right answer as to what was happening. I will say, who was it, you and I, that was talking about this? That's like we got to that scene and we really thought that there was going to be some other. I think it
Yeah.
was on the podcast where it's like
Yeah, I
that there would
totally
be
did not think she was going to murder those
actually
people.
like go forward with
Jeez.
it. Yeah, like that was shocking. That was shocking. Yeah, and I would be curious again, like for our audience, like how you take that, because I've kind of thought about like what's the metaphor in there, and I've come up with like so many different ways of looking at it and like what the metaphor in there actually looks like. Okay, so one that I was playing with, not like firmly established enough to teach on. You know, so you were kind of like, what's the thing in my life that doesn't seem clearly bad that like I need to kill? Which, by the way, I do think the judgment plays into that because like it feels like it's a really valid, legitimate thing. It seems really innocent just to be wanting the highest and best for yourself when really it's damaging. But one of the things that I thought about was kind of what we were assuming would happen is that there would be this like other creative option, because like what it seemed like was, okay, you kill the fairies and everybody's free, or like you don't kill them and everybody's enslaved and you die. And I think what we were hoping for was like, what's that third creative option? Like where does, you know, everybody what steps in and saves them? And in this story there wasn't one, but I think I was playing around with the idea in my head of like, what if there was one but nobody saw it? And are there things that sometimes we murder in our life that didn't actually need to be murdered because we couldn't see that there was another option? We couldn't see that there was a third way. It was presented like, do it this way, do it this way. You know, I think about things like productivity or success or weight loss or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, well, I want this thing and the only option is to do this and this and this, right? It's like, I want to lose weight. Okay, well, the only option is I have to get up at 5 a.m. every day and do workout that I hate, and I have to never eat dessert again, and I can't ever have this thing, and I can't ever drink wine with my friends again. Those are my three favorite, you know, sleeping in and eating dessert and drink are my favorite things. I have to kill all of them because it's the only way that I'll ever lose weight. And they kill things that actually don't need to die because they think it's the only way to get to the option that they want because they're unable to see a creative third solution. And I think I've seen that a lot. I'll see people and they're like, I want to do this or that project. And, you know, I'm all about counting the cost. I'm like, okay, so what's that going to look like? And I'll see them go like, do a sigh like, well, I guess, you know, I really ought to just stop watching TV in the evenings. There's, you know, that's 2 hours every night I could put towards this project. And I'm like, no, like I think I'm probably the only coach. I'm like, do not give up your TV time. Are you kidding me? Like you need
In
to.
fact, I'm going to give you 7 series that I'm going to assign you for homework just to make sure you don't cut out homework.
I have lots of them, or at least read a novel. Do not cut that out to go do this thing. But it's like, and I actually had somebody recently where there was this thing that they thought that they really wanted, and we had one of these moments. I don't want to give away too many details, but there was this thing that they thought that they wanted, and they took steps and they got it, but they had to quote unquote kill certain things in their life to get there. And then once they got it, they're like, I don't think it was worth the things that I sacrificed. They're like, they're like, those things that we gave up, like the slow mornings, the snuggles with the dog, the making dinner together with their partner, they're like, those things are different now. And like I killed off these things to get this dream that I thought that I wanted. And like I don't think I actually killing them was the right
dreaming
thing.
about having slow mornings and preparing meals and having my doggy snuggles.
And that's that thing is like, what are the things that we think that we have to kill to get to this place that we want to go? And do we really have to?
Yeah.
Or is there a creative third option? And again, and you know, for the actual book, I'm not saying that there was. I don't know that there was.
But that did make me think of though is, and this obviously is a complete rewrite of the book, but I'm just thinking, what if this whole scenario with having to kill the Fae and having to do all of the Under the Mountain, it just takes me to the choose your own adventure books that I read as a kid. And like sometimes you just pick the wrong thing, and then you go, if you don't want to do this, and then you do this, go to page 86. And you go to page 86. I'm like, yeah, I do that. Go to page 86. You died. I'm like, dang it. Well, then you go back and you pick the other one. So I'm thinking this whole scenario of everything she goes through under the mountain, which is just torture and craziness, which of course we know it gets redeemed, but she didn't have to go through any of that if she had spoken her heart when he was saying goodbye to her and seeing her off to land. If she just said, I love you, then she wouldn't have had to go through any of that because the curse would have been completely lifted then.
Oh my gosh.
So that's a whole choose your own adventure. If she had picked speak your mind and speak your heart there, skip all the way to some version of
It's
not
true.
that. And she wouldn't have had to murder those people. But then, of course, then she wouldn't have had anything that goes on in the next books unless they would have happened some other way.
Right.
So in a way, I'm glad she did it. But
I mean, and in her story and in our story, again, there's like that hindsight of like, oh my gosh, if I'd just done this different, like, and we can't ever do that. Like we go back and look at like what could be different, but we can look at truths from somebody else's story or what we've learned up to this point to figure out what we do going forward. And I think that there could be some wisdom in there of, okay, what's the thing that would have prevented all of this? Okay, like it was love, and it was speaking up and saying what was true and not people pleasing and not trying to like read everybody's emotions and
if nothing else, just putting the fear of not speaking up in you, because like, okay, look what happened to Pharaoh when she didn't speak up and she didn't say her truth and she didn't profess love. Do you really want to have the whole Under the Mountain experience, whatever that would look like in your life?
Yep.
Just because
and you go through, and that's, I think that but I mean, how true is that? Like we're presented with a decision, and sometimes we make a decision and it does lead to something like an Under the Mountain experience, and we come out the other side stronger, or whatever sometimes, or tired or whatever, but we come out the other side different. How about that? We come out the other side different, and
definitely,
and we can always see positives in that, but yeah, you can't ever go back and change it. But whenever, how do I say this? I'm like trying to become that person. I'm like, I don't want to be that person that has to like learn every single mistake myself. Like, can I look at different things? Can
we learn the hard lessons in life by reading romantic fantasy instead of learning by going through our own torturous experiences? If possible, I'll choose that route. That's my adventure.
That one, which I keep thinking, we talked about this in the podcast. So those of you guys listening to the podcast, we did a live event with our community earlier today, and we were somehow roundabout through conversation talking about other books, and I was talking about a book that I'm reading right now called Stop Checking Your Likes, and a part of it being like, yeah, what if we all just like let ourselves like ourselves right now, and and the fact that we have full permission right now to like who we are, support what we're doing, think positively about ourselves, and kind of go for what we want and like not care what people think. Now, when you say it really succinctly like that, it doesn't take into account like trauma and all those things that are complicated, but there can be a truth in it. Oh, here's how I'll say it. This will make more sense. There's an exercise that I did one time with one of my coaches, and it was more about business, but I think it works for life. And it's like, go. I forget how far he said to go into the future. Go, 3 years in the future. Go 5 years into the future. Okay, and your business. Imagine it's like gone, like it failed, like epically failed. Why? Like go back and tell the story of what choices you had to make for it to fail. It was some exercise called like burn it to the ground. This was Rich Litvin, by the way. And it was so interesting. He's like, most of us already know what we'll do. Like if you actually play it out, he's like, but if you write the fail story, if you write the burn it to the ground story, he's like, then you can go back and prevent it. And I do think there's something to be said for that, whether it's a relationship that we're in and we're so afraid of losing it. It's like, okay, we'll go to 3 years ago and it failed. Like, what did you do that like burnt it to the ground? Can we go back and sort of preemptively get out in front of that information so we don't have to have an under the mountain experience? And again, one of the things we talked about before was that there's only so much that we can be self-aware about ourselves, like that there's always going to be some level of, glamour happening. So I don't think we can know all of it, but most of us, like that exercise was so fascinating. I was like, okay, like if it totally fails, like why would it fail? And I wrote it down. I'm like, shoot, I know exactly why it would fail. Like most of us do. Life or relationships, or it's like, okay, I have this dream. Okay, 3 years from now, I've not done anything towards this dream of mine. Why? What happened? And like forcing yourself to tell the story of what it was, and then being able to go back and look at each of those things. And instead of having the initial, goal be this like way distant thing I want to make happen, it's like, how do I address each of these things that could be the thing that keeps me from going where I want to go? And sort of breaking it down into little bits. So all that to say, I think that there's definitely something in recognizing that as much as we needed the thing to happen so that we could have our whole story, like for ourselves to be able to go back and be like, what's the moment? What's the crossroads? What are the things that we're likely to face? And can we be preemptive and get out in front of them? And can we heal the things that we need to heal before we ever face that crossroads so that we don't end up under the mountain?
Yeah. And knowing that the reason she didn't speak up in that moment and tell Tamlin she loved him was because she didn't want to burden him, and how much that has to say about that whole situation.
Gosh, there's a whole episode there.
The whole thing.
There's a whole episode there. Man, when it would not have been a burden, it would have been such a gift.
So the opposite of a burden. So, I mean, like, wow, the opposite. Mm-hmm. It's like the 1000x version of the opposite.
I mean, okay, so let's play that out. Like her telling him that she loved him, it wouldn't have just been like just for their relationship, but it would have had a long lasting effect and impacted other people and, been huge. And as much as we're like, well, okay, well, us, fully loving somebody else and being fully loved by them, like it's not going to break a curse over an entire land. It's like, it could break a curse for the next generation though. Yeah. It could be a thing that
butterfly effect. What else would happen?
You don't, but like how many of us like discount all of those things? Like we discount ourselves, we diminish ourselves, we make it less than, like we're either unable or simply won't let ourselves imagine. Yeah, I don't know. I think so many people in relationships, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm just so thankful that they love me. It's like, yeah, do you not realize what a prize it is for you to love them? And we just don't.
Yeah.
Oh, deep stuff there. Oh, okay, friend.
We didn't know if we had anything to talk about.
Yeah, we were like,
I think we could go for 5 more hours.
I think we could too. We had
there's a 6-hour episode.
We had multiple other, I think, things written down that we didn't even get to in this podcast. But at the end, book 1 is not, again, it's not my favorite book in the series, but it kind of reminds me of almost like relationship with younger self, you know? And I think a lot of people, if we think about ourselves, that we have like a younger version of ourselves, and then we have who we are today, and then we have who we're becoming. I think a lot of people have animosity. Like if we think of that as a relationship, and there's like, I mean, there's multiple younger versions of you, and there's multiple future versions of you, just for simplicity, if we think of kind of three people in that relationship, there's often so much animosity there. And being able to have love and compassion for my younger self, to not despise my current self because she's not where she's going yet, to be able to have love and quality relationship through with all the versions of myself, has been ongoing work for me, and it's part of how I do keep growing, and I'm excited for who I'm becoming, but not because I despise who I am today. And I don't despise who I was when I was younger. Like I have compassion for her and acceptance of who I am, and like really excitement to meet the future version of me, but making sure that the relationships between all the versions of myself are positive relationships. That has been ongoing work for me. And so I know, I feel like this book sort of represents my like relationship with like a younger version of myself. I'm like, this is like a younger version of myself, the version of me that did have the negative self-talk, that didn't really know what she wanted, like that was afraid to speak up and say that she loved somebody else, that was afraid to have like an intimate moment of receiving love, right? Who went through probably way more hard stuff than she needed to. Even the stuff under the mountain, I'm like, gosh, how many things did I think I had to kill because I couldn't see another path forward? How many times did I want to pull a Feyre and like turn the dagger back on myself? Like, just there's a lot of this book that I feel like represents a younger past version of me. And so as much as I'm like, when we're actually talking about like which books we like to read, this is not the fun one. We're getting to the fun one, but I have a relationship with this book, like because I feel like it represents so much of that I think I'll always love it, and I'll always look, and it kind of represents where we came from. And that's what we tell everybody. Like, no, you have to read book one. Book one is the setup for book two.
Yeah.
But I'm like, that's how it is for all of us. Like our past is the setup for who we're becoming. We don't just get to skip it. So anyway, so all that to say, as much as people down the book because of the deep metaphor I see in it, I still have a real fondness for this one.
Yeah. Yeah. It is the foundation.
It is.
You can't leave the foundation out.
And we all have a story. We all have a place that we came from. And that's, again, deep coaching stuff. I'm like, whenever I start working with people, I do want to know where they're going, but I'm like, we got to know context. I got to know where you came from. I got to know what the trauma is. Like, you've got to know what that stuff is, and like what needs to heal. There's so many parallels in here with her painting and like purging and working through her past. And you don't get to skip to book two. You don't get to skip to book three. Like, you got to do book one work. We all have to do book one work.
Yeah.
So it's a good reminder. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So gosh, there's so much more we could say. Anything else that we feel like we need to say about book one? So many things.
This is the part where we stare at the wall.
This is the part where we stare at the wall. Dun, 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 which doesn't work very good with the podcast.
Nope.
So we just have to keep narrating. We're just staring at the wall. Except now I'm not staring at the wall, though, because I'm talking. Oh, man. Well, I'm sure we'll think of some other things, and if so, we'll record again. But but we are excited to take a short break for ourselves. And then there shouldn't be a break for you all as listeners. We have a break as recording podcasts, but we both got some stuff going on in life over the next couple weeks, and then we'll be back, which is going to give us time to read and make notes in A Court of Mist and Fury.
It's just homework.
Oh, I'm so
logging through my homework over here of reading.
Oh my goodness.
Mist and Fury again.
We're so excited, guys. We're so excited to be back in the near future recording season 2.
Thanks so much for watching, you guys. And if you haven't already, please go join our community at ACOTAR. That's ACOTAA.circle.so, where you can interact with the podcasts, get involved in the fan chats, or when you're ready, jump in for one of our shared transformational group coaching journeys. And we'll see you there, guys. Bye.
Bye.